Hello, my name is Richard Ratson, and I'm a physician in the School of Medicine at the University of Connecticut and Hartford Hospital. This presentation is going to go over the derivation of anatomical terms in general, but specifically the upper extremity. We're going to talk about the serratus anterior, the coracoid process of the scapula, the deltoid muscle, and the antecubital fossa. I first became interested in anatomy and anatomical terms when I was a 12-year-old, going downstairs to look at my father's medical books in his office in our house in Brooklyn, where he was a GP. I became fascinated with words like scapula and fibula, and coincidentally began studying Latin at the same time in school. I loved it so much I took it for 10 consecutive years, becoming a Greek and Latin major in college before going to medical school. What I hope to do in this presentation is to show you how the derivation of anatomical terms is fun and interesting and helpful for remembering what they do and where they are sometimes, and also provides you an entree into some backstories of non-medical fascinating subjects like the Noah's Ark and the pyramids, both of which are indirectly related to the naming of the antecubital fossa. So today we're going to talk about the serratus anterior, the deltoid muscle, the coracoid process, and the antecubital area, and the derivation of their anatomical terms. But first, a brief overview of anatomical terms. Most of our macroscopic anatomical terms derive from European languages and sources, from the ancient Greek and Roman authors writing in Greek or Latin, or medieval anatomists and physicians also writing in Latin, which we'll get to in a minute. And by macroscopic, I mean large structures like the cornea or easily visible, like the thumb, as opposed to microscopic structures, which of course had to await the development of the microscope. A good deal of our anatomical nomenclature comes from one man, Galen, who was an anatomist and a physician to the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius in the 2nd century CE. Galen was immensely prolific, publishing 20 volumes on different subjects, many of them related to the body, and was very influential until the 16th century when his ideas came under revision. But they were gospel until then. Even though he lived in Rome, he wrote in Greek, and many of his works are still unpublished. Beginning in 1200, roughly, anatomists and surgeons began doing dissections on humans, as opposed to Galen, who based a lot of his findings on the Barbary ape, which he dissected. Therefore, physicians and surgeons like Guy de Chauliac, Ambrose Paré, Servius, and Andreas Vesalius began questioning Galen's authority and were very influential in naming many parts of the body, and they would often name them from, like Galen, from their appearance or similarity to objects they knew in nature or in the world they lived in, or sometimes they named them based on function. But often they were in Greek and Latin terms. The refinement of macroscopic terms developed from the 1600s on, with a lot of refinement in the 19th century. Microscopic terms obviously started after the development of the microscope. The precise dating and attribution to a single anatomist or surgeon of a particular anatomical part or name is not always historically possible, as we'll see with the coracoid. Some words come from our language, or older versions of it, like Old English or Middle English, like thumb, liver, and rib. Old Norse, which is very similar to modern-day Icelandic, gives us the calf. Most of our terms, however, come from Latin, like serratus or ramus, or Greek, like balanitis, since the tip of the penis looked like an acorn to the person who coined that term. Arabic gives us nuchal for neck, and of course eponyms are those names in anatomical nomenclature which derive from the person who named it or wrote the most about it, like the canal of Schlem or fallopian tubes. The serratus anterior comes from the word for saw in Latin. The verb is sero and the noun is sera, and you can see from the sawtooth appearance why they thought the serratus anterior, which also had a sawtooth appearance, a serrated appearance, should be called the serratus muscle. And we still use that word when we talk about the Sierra Nevada, which is a sawtooth mountain range covered with snow, which is Nevada. The deltoid is a triangular shaped muscle which the person who named it thought looked like the Greek letter delta, which is the fourth letter of the Greek alphabet. The lowercase letters they're both the same, but their appearances, as you can see, alpha, beta, gamma, delta, epsilon, zeta, eta, theta, iota, kappa, lambda, mu, nu, psi, omicron, pi, rho, sigma, tau, upsilon, phi, chi, psi, omega. Now, besides fraternity houses, we run into these terms all the time. For example, as I dictate this, we're worried about the Omicron variant of the coronavirus, and we sometimes use shorthand psi for psychiatry. And we know about beta testing, and mu is often shorthand, an abbreviation for microns. The uppercase, however, is the actual appearance of the deltoid muscle, and where it got its name as deltoid. Now, oid comes from the word eidos in Greek, which comes from the word to see, which gives us the eidetic memory, which is a visual memory. And the Mississippi Delta, as you can see, is deltoid shaped. Ambrose Paré was one of the first early modern surgeons to use the word deltoid, and he used it here, as you can see, when describing the function of the different muscles and what they do to arm movements. Now you can see he wrote in Latin. So from 1200 to 1800, the lingua franca of Europe was Neo-Latin. It was called Neo because it was not a direct continuation of classical Latin, but it's a very good Latin when used correctly, and it enabled physicists in France to write a tract that Galileo in Italy could understand, since it was in Latin and not in French or Italian. Coracoid probably comes from the word for crow in Greek, and there, as you can see, this is from Perseus, which I'll get to later. It's a free database on the web. This is from a dictionary meaning of corax, and you can see it means crow, or it may be a raven's beak. And as you can also see, some of these body part names come from a appearance, not necessarily the crow beak, but a hooked handle, or anything that is hooked, or can be an instrument of torture. And the oid, as we said, comes from eidos, meaning resembling, or that which is seen. And we have many terms where the suffix oid is tacked on to represent an appearance function. And we have words like sphenoid, which comes from the Greek word sphein for wedge. We have pterygoid, which comes from the Greek word for wing, like pterodactyl. We have the glenoid, which comes from the glene, which comes to mean the hollow of the shoulder joint, because it itself means a joint. However, it's not always clear that the received opinion of etymology is that evident or agreed to by everybody. Here are some notes by a very learned pathologist, historian of medicine, who lived and worked in the first part of the 20th century, Charles Singer. And he thought that the corax Greek origin of crow is a little suspect, and it might come from a different word that looks like corax, that means something of that shape or function, like a door handle. And here he talks about coronae, which is another Greek word indicating something that looks like the shaft of a plow. Of course, vomer in the midface does mean plow, since that bone looks like that. Cubital in Latin comes from the word cubo, to recline, and it came to mean that because this neuter noun it represents that which you lean upon when you are recumbent, lying down, or the elbow. But it also comes to mean the bending or curvature of anything, for example, a shore, and you can see how it came to mean the elbow, which is the curved part of the arm. It also, as we shall see later, comes to be used as a measure of length, that is the distance from the elbow to the tip of the middle finger, which is translated as cubit when we run into that measurement noun in different languages, whether it's Hebrew or ancient Egyptian, as we'll see in a few slides from now. And this idea of it being distance, that even though it's can mean elbow, you can see on these two proverbial uses of kubitum that someone is proceeding with great haste but accomplishing nothing, or this one's running around but actually advancing not even 1 cubit, which is what I think of spinning one's wheels. Several times you'll run into a Greek noun with a Latin adjective nearby, or vice versa. And one example is the elbow. So in Greek, elbow is ankon, even though it was, and you can see here it also refers to the appearance or an angle of something. Now the Latin is cubitum, and the Greek is ankon. You can therefore see how a anatomist who knew it was the elbow decided to use the Greek word for elbow rather than the Latin word for elbow. So in the same area you have a cubitum with an ankonius muscle. So ankonius comes from this meaning for elbow in Greek. We also see the same thing with cornea. Cornea means horn in Latin, but an inflammation of the cornea is keratitis, which comes from the Greek word for horn. Now, the use of body parts as measurements is common to a lot of people who have not developed a standard unit, a uniform measurement unit like an inch or a yard or a meter. And so they use a body part, just the way they use fingers or toes for counting. And this body part is the length of the elbow to the end of the middle finger. And the same use as a measure of length is for ulna, and also the Greek word for forearm, which is all these three body parts are used in the measurement of a distance to indicate the length of something. And you can see fathom for elbow is as much as a man can clasp with both arms, and you'll see that depicted in a later slide. But all cubits are not created equal. Now, when you run into cubit in the description of the Ark, Noah's Ark in the Old Testament in Genesis, or early modern accounts, or even modern accounts of Egyptologists of the pyramids, the word that they're translating indicated the same notion of a body part measurement, but we translate it into cubit. So the actual Hebrew word we're translating into cubit is amah, and the ancient Egyptian word used to describe that length is menist. And the Egyptians realized that you cannot use one person's cubit to be the same distance as another, say, taller person's cubit. So they developed, as many of the ancient peoples did, they tried to standardize this in the royal cubit, which is different than the short Egyptian cubit. The royal cubit is 20.62 inches. And you can see from this picture from the same article by Mark Stone that a cubit is from the elbow to the tip of the middle finger. A fathom is everything between the tips of the middle fingers with outstretched arms. Therefore, when you read about Noah's Ark and you get to 300 cubits, you're actually talking about 300 times the Hebrew length, which would be different than the measurement with 300 Egyptian cubits. But you get some idea, knowing what that was equal to, roughly 18-20 inches, how many feet, to use our measurement term, and height the Noah's Ark would be. The Egyptians built their pyramids with cubit rods. These are very standardized lengths, and there was a chief cubit rod overseer who ensured that they were exactly the same length as every other cubit rod. And they were so accurate that many mathematicians and architects and Egyptologists who study the pyramids all agree that the length of one side to another differs by less than 0.5% because of the standardization of cubit rods. If you're interested, and I hope you are by this point, of doing your own anatomical etymologic research, here are some tips that I found useful in preparing this talk. The first is to go to a Google field and type in the term and then the word etymology, so ulna etymology. And you don't need to put and or because Google will automatically and it unless you specify otherwise. Google Scholar is also another source using the same technique, that is the word plus etymology. And if your Google Scholar is tied into your institutional account, it will then show you downloadable PDFs on those hits that you got in Google Scholar. The Oxford English Dictionary is a wonderful resource, an online resource with any large institution. It will give you the first appearance of that term in English and its etymology, from which language it is derived, and variant spellings, as well as the author of that source and cross-link references to the source and other words by that author. You can consult one of the many books on the last slide of this presentation. There are countless books on nomenclature of anatomical parts. You can also search for the term in PubMed with and without medical subject heading assistance, and this is something your local librarian can help you with if you're not familiar with it. But in brief, once you get into the mesh window pane, you can then select a mesh heading like anatomy, or even a lower sub menu like abdominal anatomy, and then you can and it with a history of medicine as a major mesh heading, or you can again get a sub menu heading like ancient medicine or 19th century history of medicine, and then you can end those any combination you wish in PubMed with the anatomical part you're researching. You can also use Google Books if you want to see the usage of that term in a book. You can download any Google book that Google makes available, which is usually over 75 or 100 years. You can use a custom time frame. Now, if you know a term you're looking for was used in the 16th century, or you want to narrow down your search, you can go from, say, January 1st, 1500 to January 1st, 1600. And most of those books, because they were scanned using optical character recognition, you can search digitally for any text you want in that book, which is a wonderful resource if you're doing scholarship, or in this case, for example, preparing a talk. You can then show the 1582 copy of Ambrose Pare you saw a little earlier. You can also, if you're familiar with Greek or Latin and linguistic searches, or just adventuresome, do a search for that particular word like ulna in any of the texts that Perseus, which is a free searchable text site from Tufts. They have many hundreds of texts in English, Latin, Greek, Old English, Old Norse, and German. You can search for that word because it's and then anytime you get to a page that has the text of, say, a Ciceronian text or Horace, the poet, you can then look at any word and use that word because of text encoding initiative. Each word is a link, and that will take you to another page with either more words in that usage, or to a Latin English or a Greek English dictionary. So I hope you find this talk of some interest to stimulate your scholarship or just fun in looking up anatomical terms. Here are some sources that I use, and a lot of these are pretty available in most libraries. Some of them are generic, like a dictionary of medical terms or Skinner's Origin of Medical Terms. Some on this particular slide were geared toward this talk, like the Cubit. But I think you'll find it to be a great deal of fun, and it's helped me learn and remember anatomy better, and I hope you have fun doing so yourself. Thank you for listening.